Howdy folks, welcome to the Hillbilly Kitchen. Y'all come on in, drag up a chair, and let's set a spell. We're making a Shipwreck Skillet casserole. Now what we need to start with is a pound of ground beef. And I've got it over here in my pan. I'm gonna get it turned on so we can get it cooking. I'm just gonna start by seasoning it with a little bit of salt and a little bit of pepper. This is a good place to add a chopped up onion if you've got one and you want to put it in there, or maybe some chopped up peppers, some hot peppers or bell peppers, or just, you know, whatever you want to use to season your ground beef with. I mean, we're a little bit shipwrecked right now. We kind of got to use what we've got. I'm going to go over the stuff that you sort of have to have in this and then give you some substitutes. You need some tomatoes in this. Now I have 1 can of diced tomatoes with the juice in them. Don't drain the juice. If you want to use fresh tomatoes, you can certainly use fresh tomatoes. If you've got some in your freezer, if you've got a half a jar of leftover spaghetti sauce, you could use that in this and it would give it a lot of seasoning, and you know, you wouldn't have to add anything, any other spices or anything like that to it. And I know when my kids were growing up, a lot of times I had leftover spaghetti sauce. And now that I'm not cooking for a crowd, I've always got leftover spaghetti sauce. So use that in this. This is a really good recipe for leftovers. That's kind of where it gets its name. And you need some vegetables in it. Now these can be fresh, canned, frozen, and use vegetables you like. But this recipe has a cup of peas and a cup of corn. I'm using frozen, but you could also use 1 can. Just drain the juice off of them if you're using canned. If you've got fresh, use fresh. You need a cup of milk. Any milk will work. I wouldn't use heavy cream because it would be too thick in this, but any kind of regular milk will work. Skim, half and half, whole, whatever you got. If you have a cup of shredded cheese, add it to this, and any flavor you like will work. You don't have to. Now, most shipwreck casseroles have either rice or potatoes in them. They usually don't have pasta in them. It's usually rice or potatoes because those are things that have long-term storage and can be carried. But what we're going to use in this is a box of macaroni and cheese. Any macaroni and cheese will work. And if you happen to have a box of that with the ready cheese stuff, it is a little bit better. I mean, the pasta's a little better in it and the cheese sauce is a little better in it. But anything all the way from this original stuff up to the box stuff, you can use organic. Buy this stuff when it's on sale. You can save a lot of money, and then you've got it for quick dinners. Now, when you're making this, how far you have to make your hamburger meat stretch, how many people you have to feed with it, is kind of going to determine how much you bust it up. If you are only feeding maybe 4 people with this pound of ground beef, you can leave the ground beef in some bigger chunks. But if you've got to add more vegetables, maybe you've got to use a pound of ground beef with 2 boxes of macaroni because you have to feed more people. Bust the ground beef up into smaller pieces. If you bust it up into smaller pieces, it will distribute through the meal easier, and it will, you know, it'll still be plenty enough to season the dish, and it'll be enough to satisfy everybody who is eating it. Now, something else about the ground beef. If you drain it and take some of the fat off, of course that will reduce the fat. It will also reduce the calories. But if you need to feed 10 people with a pound of ground beef, don't drain this. Leave the fat in there because the fat is what fills you up. And use 2 boxes of pasta, double your vegetables, double your milk, double your everything else. And you can make this feed 10 people with a pound of ground beef. Just double the vegetables. And I know how tight money's getting and how expensive food's getting, and I know we're going to have to start stretching everything we get more, stretching our budgets more, and I know we've already started doing it. But busting the hamburger up in smaller pieces will make it go farther, and as long as everybody gets some, they're going to be okay with it. If you're worried about protein, you need more protein in it, you can add a can of some kind of beans in this. Just any kind you like, northern beans, kidney beans, or whatever. If you've got some leftover beans, dump them in here. If you've got a little leftover chili, not enough to feed everybody, add it to this. And it'll blend in just fine. It'll add to the flavor, it'll add to the seasoning, so you won't have to add as many spices. Basically, anything you've got left over, just about, you can add into this dinner. And it's a quick weeknight meal. I really like the shells in this a little bit better. Yep, and I've got some shells here, so I'm going to use this shell pasta. Okay, I'm going to take just a little bit of the fat out of mine, not all of it, because the fat not only adds calories and fills you up, it also adds flavor, but there's a little bit more in here than I need. And it would also depend on your diet too. If you've been warned about cholesterol, you definitely want to get some of that fat out of it. All right, my ground beef is about done there, so I'm going to go ahead and add in my cheese sauce. And kind of stir that in. And I'm going to add in my pasta and my tomatoes. And my milk. The juice from the tomatoes and the milk are going to cook my pasta. Now, once you get this kind of boiling and you get ready to put the lid on it, you are going to turn it down on low. If you don't, your milk is going to scorch and it's going to burn and it's just going to make a big old mess, so you don't want to do that. And you can bake this in the oven if you want to. Go ahead and stir in these froze peas. And my corn. You can wait a while to add the corn if you're using canned or fresh, because if you boil it the whole time it takes to boil the pasta, then your corn's going to be a little bit tough. But because this is frozen and it does need to cook just a little while, I'm going to go ahead and dump it in there. All right, and now all we're going to do is cover it, keep an eye on it. We'll maybe stir it a time or two and put a lid on it. Turn it down. And you want to cook it about as long as what your box says. Let's see. This box says 9 minutes. It might take a little bit longer than that because it's cooking in the milk and the tomato juice, and sometimes pasta doesn't soak up stuff like the milk and the tomato juice quite as quick as it would water. And you might even have to adjust the moisture in it and add just a tiny bit of water to keep it from burning. That's why we're going to stir it after a couple minutes. So let's just keep an eye on it, turn it down, make sure it stays boiling, but it doesn't stick. Okay, it's cooking up just fine. I'm not having any signs of sticking or drying out just yet. I did get me about half a cup of water here to have it ready in case I need it. And you can see how pretty this dish is with the corn and the peas and the tomatoes. Almost looks like Christmas time. Should have done this one in July for our Christmas in July video. All right, just kind of keep it covered there, and we're gonna let it boil a couple more minutes. Charlotte just took her big motorcycle trip and she got to go to Yellowstone, and she brought me back a bear paw pot holder. Now is a good time to add some spices to this if you want to add some spices. And you can season this pretty much any way you want to. If you want to add something to give it a little heat, some hot pepper, some chili powder, or just leave it kind of basic, that's fine too. A little Italian seasoning would work in here. Like I said, you can use leftover spaghetti sauce in it if you want to. I'm gonna add just a little bit of this right here. It's a red spice, and it's got a little bit of heat to it. It's some peppers. I got it in some packages that I get from Israel every so often, and they just have different stuff that comes in them. Usually some kind of food, spices, maybe some sort of a side dish or something, some kind of snack, nuts or fruit. But I'll put a link to those in there because the stuff that comes in them is very interesting, and I like getting the stuff like that from Israel. It's a good way to support their economy too. And if y'all are interested in that, you can order individual items, or you can get the boxes once a month. Or I think you can sign up to get them like every 3 months. But anyway, they are kind of fun. I don't see me being able to afford a trip to Israel anytime soon, and that's kind of a way to, I don't know, get a little bit of the culture anyway, I guess. Check my pasta again here. Okay, it's done, and that added just a little bit of flavor to it without having to add any more salt. The only salt I put in this was a little bit in the meat. If you want more salt in it, of course you can certainly add it, but the macaroni and cheese mix does have salt in it. So if you're using some kind of boxed macaroni and cheese, keep in mind it does have salt in it. You might want a little bit more for the pasta and stuff, but that's up to you. I would just set it on the table and let people who want more add more. I'm going to add about half of my cheese here and stir it in. And then I'm going to put the other half of it on the top. And actually, I think I'm going to go ahead and cut this off because it's done and I don't want it to stick now. I've cooked it all and it looks good. It's not too runny, so it's going to be like a casserole, you know, and not run everywhere, especially once it sets for just a minute. So I don't want to burn it at the end. If you're cooking this in a cast iron skillet, you will want to cut the heat off here. If you are cooking it on a glass top stove, you will probably want to cut the heat off here because they hold a lot of heat. And just leave the pan sitting on the stove while you add the cheese and stir it in and melt it and stuff. Okay, now I'm going to kind of spread it out there so it's like a casserole. And I'm going to add the rest of my cheese here to the top of it. And you can put this in the oven if you want to and brown it. Like, it's August right now, so I don't think I want to turn my oven on to brown it because it will melt just fine here. No need to heat the house up that much. And this is a really quick weeknight dinner. You can have this on the table because you're not really cutting anything up in 20 minutes. You've got the kids doing ball practice or band or maybe going to church on a Wednesday night or something and you don't have time to cook. This is a good one because it's fast. It said 20 minutes and you can have it on the table. I didn't need to add any more of that water. Just the milk and what was in the tomatoes cooked my pasta just fine. Okay, that's heavy. Let's see what this looks like here. Yep, cheese is melted. And I got a little spot there. I could have let it go a little bit longer. But you can see how quick this is. It is very pretty. It is very easy. You don't have to cut anything or dice anything. You literally just brown the ground beef and throw everything in the pan. And now we're making Granny's ham and tater soup. This is one of those recipes that really should be used as a guide more than as the law because there are so many substitutions you can make in this. You can make it with any kind of ham, you can use any kind of milk in it, you can use any variety of potatoes, and you can season it pretty much with anything that you want to. Now for seasoning, I'm using some vegetables and I'm going to do like a vegetable stock in this because I don't like to pour canned stock and stuff in my homemade soup. That kind of defeats the purpose of having homemade soup to me. So I'm using some chopped up carrots, chopped up celery, chopped up onions, and chopped up green peppers and butter and just a little salt and pepper, and that's going to season it. And of course I've got some ham in it, and that's kind of going to season it too. And I have about 8 ounces of ham here, and I've got about 4 cups of potatoes that I've chopped up. And how big you chop your ham and your potatoes is entirely up to you. You can have this really chunky, or you can have it creamier. And I'm going to do something a little bit creamier. And the only other thing you need is some water. Now, how you cook this is going to affect the flavor. You can put water in and put all your vegetables in and just start boiling it and boil it. But that's not going to give you the same flavor as if you get your pot hot, which is what we're going to do. And then you put your butter in it, and you get your butter hot, and then you put all these vegetables in your pot. And you can even go ahead and put your ham and your potatoes in there and kind of saute all of those in the butter. That's going to give you a totally different flavor than if you just boil it. Now, you can make this, I said you can use any kind of ham. You can use any kind of leftover ham that you have. And depending on, your budget and what you have available and how many people you have to feed, you can use anywhere from 4 ounces to a pound of ham in this. I mean, if you're on a really tight budget and you've got to feed a crowd, you can just use a little bit of ham in this and use it more as a flavoring. So you don't have to have a whole bunch of ham. I've only got about 8 ounces. But like I said, if you've got a lot of leftover ham that you need to use, maybe you made a ham for Easter or Thanksgiving or Christmas, and you want to use that extra ham, go ahead and throw it in here. Because you can use a lot or you can use a little. So anyway, like I said, we're going to start with our butter, and we're going to get it hot first. And I'm using a whole stick of butter in this because a lot of my flavor is going to come from my butter. And generally speaking, you want at least a half a cup of all of your chopped vegetables. If there's something here you don't like, leave it out. If there's something you want to put in it, like if you really like mushrooms, you could put mushrooms in this. You could put hot peppers in it. The possibilities are just endless for things that you can flavor this with. So, and you can see here, I've probably got almost a cup of bell peppers, but that's like half of a bell pepper, and I just chopped up half of it. And I've probably got almost a cup of chopped up carrots, at least 3/4 of a cup. So how much you put just really is what you want. That's why I said this is a guide recipe. It's not really something that you have to make exactly. But if you want exact measurements, do at least half a cup. Okay, my butter is hot and it's actually starting to brown a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and dump these vegetables in. Just all of them all at once. Now, if you actually let your butter brown before you add your vegetables, it will change the flavor of your whole soup. I'm also going to go ahead and add in my ham now. And putting the ham in here with the vegetables and letting it saute a little bit totally changes the flavor of the ham. And I really like this soup better with a saltier ham, but if you have a sweet ham left over, some brown sugar ham or honey ham or something, it'll work just fine in this. And I'm even going to go ahead and add my potatoes, and I'm going to cook all this just in the butter until it kind of starts to brown a little bit and until it kind of starts to get tender. And that's going to let the flavor from that butter get into all those vegetables. But I'm not going to stir my potatoes up yet because I want that ham and those peppers and onions and celery to brown a little bit more before I stir it all up. And I'm just going to put the lid on it. I said we could use any milk in this, and you can use any milk. This is a good recipe for your canned evaporated milk. And you can use anything from heavy cream all the way to skim milk in it. The more fat in your milk, of course, the richer your broth is going to be when you get your soup done. I have some half and half today. I had half and half that I needed to use. Everything is already starting to cook and it's starting to get tender already. But we're going to go ahead and give it a little stir and get some of our potatoes down in there so that the flavor of the onions and the ham and the peppers and all that stuff can get in them. There's not much moisture left in the pot, but I'm not going to add my water just yet. I really want those flavors to get incorporated before I add the water so that the potatoes taste like everything else. And the stock is really rich. I mean, we're even going to use the potatoes to kind of add to the vegetable stock because that's the only stock in this. We're not going to add any canned stuff to it. And you want to stir it occasionally. You want to make sure it doesn't dry out because if it dries out, it'll burn really quick. But just stir it occasionally. When it looks like the vegetables are starting to cook and your butter's kind of soaked into them, at any point after that, you can go ahead and add your water. And how brown you cook this is entirely up to you. You can really brown this. I mean, you know, cook it until it gets a real brown color, almost like fried potatoes or something, and that will change the flavor. But it's just up to you, and you know, play with it a little bit and kind of see how you like it better, what taste you prefer. But my vegetables are certainly not cooked yet, especially my potatoes. They're still fairly firm and they're not breaking down. You're going to have to cook this until the potatoes break down. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add just enough water to cover them good. And that's going to take anywhere from 1 to 2 cups of water. It just kind of depends. But I want to get them all submerged good. About like that, just a little bit above the top. And then I'm just going to let it sit here and simmer until my potatoes are really, really soft. And at this point, you shouldn't even need to stir it much because it has enough liquid in it that it's not going to burn on the bottom. Unless you've got a really, really thin pot. And if you have a really, really thin pot, sometimes even though you have plenty of liquid in your pot, it will tend to kind of burn on the bottom. So if you're using a really thin pot, you might have to stir it. Okay, once your potatoes get really done and they kind of start to fall apart, which mine are, now you want to go ahead and add your salt and your pepper or whatever else you want to season it with. And like I said, you can season this with about anything. It's just whatever flavor you like. I like it with just the vegetables and salt and pepper, and the green pepper and the onion and the celery and all that stuff is going to add so much flavor to it. I'm probably using maybe half teaspoon of pepper, and the salt and the pepper is just to taste. And I'm going to put close to a teaspoon of salt in this. And the salt will depend very much on the kind of ham you're using. If you use something like country ham in this, you're not going to want much salt because it is very, very salty, and you could use country ham in this. With all those vegetables, I want a little bit of salt. Now, something else that you could put in this, for the potatoes, you could use the dried diced potatoes if you had some of those put back and you wanted to use some of those. And you can even make this with instant potatoes, or you can thicken it with instant potatoes. Now, I like to take this little thing here, or a potato masher, and kind of bust up my potato chunks even a little bit smaller. Now, if you want yours super chunky, don't do this. And if you don't do this, you might want to take a few of your potatoes out and mash them up and then add them back into it, because the only thing that we're really using to thicken this with is the potatoes. And you can see it's very, very thick right now, where the potatoes have cooked down and actually kind of dissolved in that vegetable broth. Okay, now I'm going to add my milk. And just whatever kind of milk you've got will work. gonna stir that up, and I'm gonna let it sit there and simmer until it comes back to a boil. And if you want this thicker, like I said, you can do a few mashed potatoes in it. You could also do a cornstarch slurry, or you could make a slurry and you could add a little bit of flour to your milk and add some milk and some flour in here, and that would thicken it. Now, if you use flour to make your slurry, you're going to want to cook it for a little bit longer, because a lot of people say that they can taste the flour in it, or in any kind of sauce or whatever that they use flour in to thicken it, and they don't like that taste of raw flour. So if you add I don't know, you'd want to add maybe 2 to 4 tablespoons of flour if you used flour. Stir that up in your milk while it's cold, pour it in, and make sure you boil it for probably 3 or 4 minutes to cook that flour so you don't have that raw flour taste. Doing it like this, or if you use the instant potatoes to thicken it, or a cornstarch slurry, you don't have to do that. You just have to heat it back up. I do like to let mine simmer with the milk in it for just a couple minutes anyway, at least a couple of minutes, because the milk will actually thicken some too without anything in it. Now, how I adjust the thickness of my soup, or at least this kind of soup, is as it's simmering or coming back to a simmer after I've added my milk, I just take my spoon or whatever I'm using to stir it with and kind of mash up some of my potatoes just a little bit at a time by pushing the spoon on the edge of the pot and then giving it a little stir. And when it gets where I want it, I stop doing that. And like I said, there's a dozen ways you can thicken it, and it's up to you how thick you even want it. You might not want to thicken it at all. And you do want to keep in mind, as it cools, it is going to thicken a little bit because of the starch in the potatoes. And if you add instant potatoes to thicken it with, be very, very careful, because as they cool, they get really thick. So if you were going to add instant potatoes to thicken this, you would want to add them like a tablespoon at a time and stir it in and give it just a second to see what it's going to do. Don't dump in like a cup all at once, because you're going to end up with something you can slice instead of a creamy soup. But I think I've got mine about as thick as I want it, and it's definitely hot again. You know, the milk is hot, it's boiling. So I'm going to cut it off and we're going to enjoy a bowl. Now, when my kids were all home, or if I was making this for several people, I would make sure I had some shredded cheese and some sour cream to serve with it on the side. If you are making it just for yourself and you want the cheese in it, you can add the cheese to it now, and that'll actually thicken it up a little bit too. And you could even add the sour cream to it now. But not everybody likes that. Brett's really not a very big fan of sour cream, and he doesn't like cheesy soups much either. So I always serve it on the side, and this soup is excellent without the cheese. It's good with cheese, and it totally changes the flavor. So if you're making it for yourself, you might want to do it with cheese one day and without cheese another day. So if you have it on the side, you can change it. You can see what our soup looks like here. It does still have some pretty good sized chunks of potatoes in it. And like I said, you can mash it up more if you want it mashed up more, make it creamier. You could take a potato masher before you add your milk and really mash the potatoes up fine. But that's just up to you. Or you can do bigger chunks of ham and bigger chunks of potatoes and big chunks of carrots and have a really chunky soup. And still use that same vegetable broth to season it with. And you know, you've got all that flavor without the canned broth or without any bouillon or anything like that. And it has a much cleaner, more natural, more vibrant flavor. To me, when you add the canned broth and stuff to soup, that's kind of all you taste. You're going to taste the ham in this, and you're going to taste the vegetables in this. Even if you add the cheese and the sour cream, you're still going to taste that. And like I said, that totally changes it. So if you're making it for yourself and you're gonna be having it for a couple of days, do this stuff on the side, and that way you can have a different soup tomorrow. And now we're making SOS. There are actually two versions of SOS. This is an old military dish. There's the Army version, which is made with ground beef, and that's what we're making today. And there's another version made with chip beef. It's a good budget recipe. I raised my kids on this stuff, and because it's so inexpensive and so fast and easy, when they were in school on weeknights, this was like a weekly dish. Because, you know, when you get home late and you can get dinner on the table in 15-20 minutes, that's what you need. Anyway, it has just a few ingredients because it is a basic dish. You need a pound of ground beef, and you need some seasoning. I just use salt, pepper, and onion powder, and that is to taste. For the gravy, you need 2 cups of milk and 1/4 cup of flour. Now, if you're doing more or you're doing less, you want 2 tablespoons of flour per cup of milk. And if you're on a budget, again, you can substitute part of the milk for water if you need to, and you can use any milk in this. You can use canned milk, you can use powdered milk, because it's not really going to change the taste. And the only other thing you need is you need some toast, because you serve this over toast. You can use any grade of ground beef in this. You can use super lean stuff, or you can use the 70-30 regular ground beef. Buy whatever's on sale. I have ground chuck today. And like I said, with 2 cups of gravy, the pound of meat is going to give you plenty of beef flavor. You're not really going to need to add the bouillon. But if you want to add a teaspoon or even 2. If you're adding the bouillon, you want to do about a teaspoon per cup of liquid. And like I said, if you need to stretch this, you can do 4 cups of gravy with your pound of ground beef. A pound will feed at least 6 people, because when my kids were growing up, I always made a pound, and there was 6 of us. And if they had friends over, I'd add extra gravy. I would just use extra milk and make more gravy and feed the rest of them. You want anywhere from 1/3 to 1/2 cup of gravy per person. The spices really are all to taste. I probably use close to a tablespoon of onion powder in mine. And I put some in the meat when I'm cooking it, and then I'll add some more when I make the gravy, so that I've got that onion flavor in my gravy too. And I do the same thing with my salt and my pepper. I put a little in when I'm cooking my meat, and then I add a little more when I'm making my gravy. And I like this dish kind of peppery. If you don't put so much pepper in it. And also, if you want other spices in it, you can put other spices in it, because like I said, this is a really, really basic dish. You can add just about any flavor in it you want to. Now for this dish, because we're going to be making gravy out of this and we're going to be serving it over toast, you do want to bust the ground beef up pretty fine when you're cooking it. And as you cook it, you know, just stir it and keep busting it up. The big lumps just don't give you the consistency that, well, they don't give me the consistency I want. I guess if you want big chunks, that's up to you too. But we like it better if it's busted up pretty fine. And because it's one of those dishes where you're trying to stretch the ground beef and make it feed more people, if it's busted up better, it will go farther. I mean, you can easily make 4 cups of gravy in here, and nobody's going to notice that you've really stretched your meat and it's feeding more people with less ground beef. So, and it'll still satisfy everybody too. Now you can see here, this has almost no fat in it. Normally I have a lot more fat than this with ground chuck, but if you want to take some out, you can just take your paper towel and soak it up until it gets to the point where you've removed enough grease. And a lot of folks too think that you have to have a ton of grease to make gravy. You do not. You have to have 2 tablespoons of flour for every cup of liquid. That's what you have to have. A little bit of grease will go a long way. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add my flour. And even though it doesn't look like I have a lot of grease in here, all of my hamburger is coated with grease, and my flour is going to soak up all that grease. Now at this point you want to kind of stir it non-stop. And I'm going to go ahead and add in a little more onion powder. And if you add in your onion powder now, it will cook and it will kind of give you the flavor of like sauteed onions more than a fresh onion flavor. So if you want a fresh onion flavor, wait and add your extra onion powder after you've added your milk. If you want a sauteed onion flavor, add it now. If you're new to cooking gravies, this is going to concern you. As you cook that flour, it's going to stick to the bottom of your pan. You can see it coating the bottom of my pan all and sticking to it, and it looks like I'm going to have a mess that I'm never going to get cleaned up. It's fine. As soon as I add the milk, all that's going to come off the bottom of the pan, and that's what's going to give my gravy all of its flavor. The browned flour, the browned beef fat, and the toasted onion powder. And I do scrape the bottom of the skillet as I do this. And you want to cook your flour for at least a minute, maybe 2 or 3 minutes. A lot of folks have commented and said that whenever they make gravy with flour, it tastes like raw flour. Well, you got to cook it for a minute. And you don't have to cook it long, but you do have to cook it for a minute. And it's going to cook a little bit more when you add your milk. But you can't get this stuff here that's stuck on the bottom of the pan if you use cornstarch and thicken it. I said a lot of folks won't put the flour in it because they say it tastes like flour. Well, just cook it a little. You can add cornstarch to your milk and thicken it with cornstarch, especially if you have a gluten allergy. You could do a tablespoon of cornstarch per cup of liquid, and you put it in the cold liquid and then you add it to the pan. But that's not going to give you the brown stuff on the bottom of the pan. Okay, now I'm going to add my milk all at once. My flour's cooked to plenty. And I'm just going to keep stirring it until my gravy gets thick. And I'm going to scrape the bottom of the pan so that all that stuff that I burned on the bottom there or stuck to the bottom comes off. And I am going to go ahead and I'm going to add some more salt and pepper. And like I said, this is just to taste. So you'll have to taste yours as you cook it, as it gets done. It's not going to taste like much until you let that gravy get a little bit thicker. And I do like a little pepper in here, about like that. You can put your salt and your pepper in when you put your flour in if you want to. It won't change the flavor much because you're not cooking it that long. But as you cook pepper and salt, they both lose flavor. So that's something kind of to keep in mind, I guess. You have to use a little more pepper if you cook it longer. And you have to use more salt if you cook it longer. I kind of go around the sides of my pan a little bit too as I let it cook, so much doesn't build up around the edge of the pan. I don't know if you can hear this or not, but as I was scraping this, I wasn't hearing my fork on the bottom of the pan at all. That's because it had all that flour and stuff stuck to the bottom. Now I can hear my fork against the bottom of my smooth pan. When you make your gravy, if it's too thin, you just keep cooking it longer. If it's too thick, you can always add a little more milk. And if you have leftovers, you're going to want to add a little bit of milk to it when you reheat it to thin it back out, because it gets thicker as it cools, and any leftovers are going to turn into a paste that you could literally cut with a knife almost. But you can add a little milk to them when you heat it up, and it will turn right back into creamy gravy, just like what we're making now. So it does make good leftovers. If you're new to cooking too, I'm stirring this with the flat part of the fork like this. I'm not stirring it like this. And that's because that gets everything off the bottom. If I stirred it like this, I'd just have a whole bunch of little bitty streaks in the bottom of my pan, and I would probably never get it cleaned off. I'm starting to get a few little bubbles now, and my gravy is starting to thicken. And we're going to want to cut this off before it gets as thick as we want it. I got some trails with my fork when I stir it now, but I want it just a tiny bit thicker. If you like it thinner, you're probably going to want to quit cooking it right here as soon as you get the first streaks with your fork. You can see how it like pushes up as I'm stirring it, and it's deeper on the side that I'm pulling it toward. That's starting to thicken, and I'll get a nice trail in it. And it's gonna, like I said, get a lot thicker as it cools. And I think I've got mine where I want it, right there. It's gonna be about twice as thick by the time you get it served. So you do wanna quit before it gets super thick. You can see there I've got a nice trail. I can even stir it, and you can almost see the bottom of the pan. See, you can see the bottom of the pan when I stir it with this spoon. It's completely clean, nice and shiny and black. That's because all that stuff that's stuck on the bottom boils off in your gravy, and that thickens it and adds all the flavor to it. And that's what you want right there. When the kids were little, we would do scrambled eggs and hash browns and some kind of fruit for dinner. A lot of times it was applesauce. And you can use fresh fruit or canned fruit. Any kind of berry, even strawberries or something would go good with this. Just an apple or a banana. But this is a good use, especially in the wintertime, for your canned fruits when you don't have a lot of fresh stuff. So a lot of times that was what we would have with it. When Brett and I have it, we almost always have it with breakfast food. The gravy and the toast just go good with hash browns and eggs. So that's how we have it most of the time. You can also do it just the SOS with some fresh garden goodies, some tomatoes and cucumbers and stuff. It really is such a basic dish that you could serve it with a lot of different stuff. And it's kind of up to you what you put with it. I just wanted to give you some ideas because, like I said, if you've never had SOS, you're going to have a hard time deciding what to make with it. But this is probably one of the easiest, most budget-friendly dishes I made the whole time my kids were growing up. Because you can take a pound of ground beef and you can feed 8, 10, even 12 people with it if you make more gravy. And you can cut your milk in your gravy. This really does need to have the milk gravy on it. I mean, it's a totally different dish without the milk gravy. But you can cut it, and you can do half milk and half water if you need to. And add a little bouillon in there to boost the flavor if you do that. Like I say, get you some chicken and beef bouillon and keep it in your pantry, because I got a feeling with the way grocery prices are going, we're all going to need some of those tricks that our grandmas used to stretch our food, to stretch our dollar, and to feed our families. Now we're making an old-fashioned hamburger casserole. Okay, the basic ingredients for this casserole are a pound of ground beef, and you could substitute chicken or something else, turkey, even if you wanted something other than beef in your recipe. A cup of chopped onions, and about 4 cups of diced potatoes. You can use any potato you want. and salt and pepper to taste. Now, this is a very, very basic recipe. The only other thing that you have to have in this is about a cup of liquid. You can use plain water if you would like. I'm going to add a little bit extra to mine. I just like a little something extra added to it. It is good though, plain, with just these ingredients and a cup of water or a cup of milk, whichever you prefer. I'm going to add a cup of chopped peppers to mine, just green bell peppers, and a cup of milk, not a cup of water. And I have about a teaspoon of cornstarch here. Now, what that's going to do is it's going to thicken the base in my casserole. The starch from the potatoes will thicken it some, but I like mine just a little bit thicker than what the potatoes make it. And I'm going to add some provolone cheese to mine. I'm just using slices. You can use any kind of cheese you like or no cheese at all. If you did a cheddar cheese, it would kind of give it a Mexican food flavor. You could even add some hot peppers to it or some taco seasoning or some other kind of hot pepper, and that would give it like a Mexican food flavor. You can just do leave out the peppers and do American cheese. Kids love it that way. Literally, the add-ins are limitless. We're going to brown our ground beef and our onions and our peppers on about medium heat. So just go ahead and dump that in the pan there all at once. If you have an oven-safe pan, this is a one-pot meal because you can brown your ground beef and your vegetables in this pan and then put it right in the oven. A cast iron skillet works great for this. If you've got cast iron skillets, just start it in a cast iron skillet and then pop it in the oven. Okay, the salt and the pepper is just to taste, so you do however much you like. I like quite a bit of salt and quite a bit of pepper. And I'm going to season it a little bit again when I add my potatoes. Now, I'm using ground round in this, which is 8515. It's pretty lean, and I like the leaner meats for stuff like casseroles and meatloaf and things like that, because you don't have to drain the fat if you don't want to. And in this casserole, you're not going to want to drain the fat because the fat is actually what seasons it. Now, if you're using a really fatty ground beef, like the 70-30 stuff, you may want to drain some of the grease off of it after your meat starts to cook so that your finished casserole is not too greasy. Don't drain all of it, and don't wait until your peppers and onions are completely cooked to drain it, because you'll lose all your flavor from your peppers and your onions too. And in fact, if you were using something like a 70-30 ground beef, you might want to even start cooking it and get your meat about halfway cooked and then drain it. Then add your peppers and your onions and finish cooking. You do want to stir it and bust your meat up really good. You really can't get it too fine. If you like really big chunks in it though, I suppose you could not bust it up quite as much. But I think it's better if the chunks of meat are busted up. Okay, now you can keep cooking this until your meat gets really, really brown. But if you're in a hurry, as soon as your meat gets pretty gray, where it's busted apart and not sticking together anymore, go ahead and dump your potatoes in there and start cooking them. Now, if you're not in a hurry, at this point you can mix this up, add your liquid, top it with your cheese, and put it in your oven. If you put it in the oven at this point though, with the potatoes raw, you're going to have to bake it for about an hour. If you put the potatoes in it now and you start cooking them on top of the stove, you can cook them on top of the stove for about 10 or 15 minutes, then add it to the oven and only cook it for about 15 more minutes until your cheese gets brown, and that cuts your total cooking time in half. So if you want to start your potatoes on top of the stove, just mix them in a little bit. You might want to add a little more salt and pepper at this point. Okay, now to start cooking the potatoes on top of the stove, or cook them on top of the stove, like I said, at this point we could dump in our milk and top it with our cheese and put it in the oven, and it would take about an hour. But if you want to save yourself 30 minutes, put the lid on your pan and let those potatoes sit on top of the stove and cook for about 15 minutes, and they'll get soft, and then all you have to do is put it in the oven and brown it. Okay, our potatoes are about soft, so I'm going to show you how to put the rest of this casserole together. You can see in here that it's almost completely covered with liquid, and in this pan I may not be able to quite add my whole cup of milk. Usually I can, usually I don't have that much liquid, but where I started cooking it on top of the stove with a lid on it, but it's retained a lot of the moisture, so might not get this whole cup in here. If we don't, that's okay. You just want to make sure everything is covered. Yep, I'm going to stop right there. I don't want it to boil over in my oven. Now, once you get your vegetables all covered with your liquid, and like I said, you don't have to add that cornstarch in there. If you do add the cornstarch, though, add it to the milk or your water before you dump it in your casserole. And give it another little stir. And then if you want cheese, go ahead and top it with cheese. And like I said, you can use slices, you can use shredded cheese, or you can use no cheese. You can use any flavor you like. I'm using this provolone because it kind of gives it a flavor like cheesesteak, and I really like that flavor. And whatever kind of cheese you use, you just lay it all over the top and coat the top really well with it. And you can add as much cheese as you want to. So I'm going to put about 4 ounces or so on here. And that will give it a nice flavor. Even 4 ounces is enough to give it a really nice flavor. And it's going to brown really nice on top and make it pretty. And all you do at this point is put it in a 350-degree oven. If you cook the potatoes on the stove, seriously, about 15 minutes. If you added everything and didn't start your potatoes on top of the stove, you just dumped them in there and dumped in your milk and stuff, topped it with your cheese, it's going to take 45 minutes to an hour depending on how big your potatoes are. And in about 15 minutes, that's what you have. And you can, if you don't have an oven-safe pan like an iron skillet or one of the porcelain-coated ones with the metal handle, you can dump it in a casserole dish. You don't have to make it in the pan that you fry your hamburger and stuff in. But why not make it in the pan that you fry your hamburger and stuff in? I mean, less mess is best. This hamburger casserole is a really easy one-pot dish, and you can make it start to finish in about 45 minutes on a school night or a work night when you don't have much time. Or you can stick it in the oven and bake it kind of slow on a cold winter day. It smells wonderful. Give this a try and make it your own thing. You know, add whatever flavor cheese you like or whatever vegetables you like. You could add carrots to it, peas, corn, whatever you want, really, you can put in here. I just kind of wanted to give you the basic ingredients and the basic casserole because a lot of people have commented and said everybody tries to do these complicated recipes that you have to have a million ingredients for, and you can never cook supper with the recipes. Well, this is a recipe that you can make no matter what you got in your fridge because you can put whatever you want in it. Now we're making poor man's meal. The need to eat cheap ain't nothing new. You need about a hot dog per person that you're going to feed. And you also need about a tater per person that you're going to feed. And then you need some chopped up onion. And that's all you need to go in this, except for a little salt and pepper to season it with and something to fry it in. Now, you can use oil, you can use butter, you can use bacon grease, you can use whatever you've got. What I have in my pan is just enough oil to coat the bottom good. I don't have quite a 1/4 of an inch in there. I just put in enough to coat it good, and so there's, you know, a little to slop around. I've got my pan turned on here, and you do want to preheat it good. You don't want to add your potatoes into cold grease, no matter what it is, whether it's oil or butter or bacon grease, because they'll tend to stick, and they will also absorb a lot more, and it will make what you're cooking taste greasy. And you can see that is not hot yet. We want the pan to get hot enough so that there's bubbles all around our potato. And you can drop one in there to test it, and then when it gets hot, you can add the rest of them in. Okay, once your oil gets hot, or your bacon grease, or whatever you're cooking these in, go ahead and add your potatoes. Once you get the potatoes in the grease, stir them around a little bit, because that kind of coats them before they get mushy, and it'll help keep them from sticking. And I always put my potatoes in first, and then I add in my onions, and then my hot dogs. And I'm going to kind of turn this down just a little bit to where it's cooking on about medium. And I'm going to put a lid on it, because that will cook it much faster. And if you've been working all day, which right now I'd say most folks are at least 2 household incomes if you're not having to work 2 jobs, and you need a fast meal. So covering it will make it cook faster, and it will also get the potatoes and the onions cooked before they start burning. So just put it all in there. Anything else you've got that would add flavor to it, you can add it. All right, this is probably ready for us to give it a stir. And it's only been cooking a few minutes, like maybe 4 or 5 minutes, if that long. See, our taters ain't even really started to brown good yet, but that's all right. They are already starting to get soft because we were cooking them with that lid on them. Okay, I'm gonna leave my lid off now, because like I said, my potatoes are already starting to get soft. And I'm just gonna let them sit here and cook until everything kind of gets a little bit brown. And I'm also gonna go ahead and add my salt and my pepper now. I save my salt and my pepper till near the end. And you're not gonna wanna use quite as much salt in this as you would just plain potatoes, because the hot dogs are gonna have a little bit of salt in them, and you're gonna get that flavor in it. And you know, you wanna taste it. It's just to taste. But if you save the salt until closer to the end, you don't have to use as much. And I know lots of folks have trouble with salt. Seems like the doctors put everybody on a low salt diet. And I'm probably putting about ½ teaspoon in there. I do have the whole onion and 4 potatoes. If you've got big eaters, these are not very big potatoes. You might want to put an extra tater or 2 in there if you're feeding folks that eat a lot, teenagers especially. And I probably put about ½ teaspoon of pepper in there, maybe a little bit more. And we'll go ahead and give that a little stir. While our poor man meal sits here and browns a little bit, I want to share John 16:33 with y'all. These things I have spoken unto you, that you might have peace. In the world ye shall have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. Things today are more turbulent than they have ever been in my life. And I have lived quite a few years, over half a century. And I've never seen this much stuff at one time. But the Bible tells us that Jesus has already overcome it. And as Christians, we should show the world that joy. We should show the world that peace that passes all understanding, because we know Christ has already overcome it. There's an old saying that tough times build strong character. And tough times do build strong character. Tough times also build strong faith. This is our opportunity to show the world how strong our faith is and how great our God is. So no matter how bad it gets at the grocery store or at the gas station or all the stuff going on around the world, you let the world know that the Lord is walking through it with you, and you let the world know that it's going to be okay because Jesus has already overcome it. This is our chance. So pray harder than you ever have, but don't worry about it. Don't get upset over it. Don't get distraught or discouraged. It's going to be okay. And we have to let the world know that. That's our job. Okay, let's check on our poor man's meal again. We're going to get through this. Don't worry about it. We might all have to eat hot dogs for a while, but we'll get through it. Now, it's starting to brown a little bit. And at this point, it's just kind of how you want it. It's all done right now. The taters are soft. The onions are soft. The flavors are going to be well mixed. If you want it browner, you just keep a cooking. If you don't want it that brown, if you want the taters a little crunchier, you might want to cut them a little bit bigger than I did if you want them crunchy. I cut them kind of small because I wanted this to be fast. If you want a little bit of crunch in your tater, cut bigger pieces and it will be a little bit crunchier. You'll have the little brown on the outside, but maybe still a little bit of crunch on the inside. Also, the texture of the taters is going to depend on the variety of the tater you used. These are just regular old russets, so they're going to be a little bit softer. A Redskin or a Yukon Gold or any kind of new tater out of your garden is going to be a little crunchier. So if you want a little crunchier texture, if you've got a firmer tater, that'll give you a crunchier texture. And they're just really ain't no trick to it other than that. You just put the stuff in the pan and cook it till it's as brown as you want it. Like I said, it's perfectly done now. All the taters are soft, the onions are soft, and you can eat it just like this, or you can keep cooking it till it's browner. It's literally just whatever you want. If you're on a budget, if you're trying to feed your family, if you need a fast dinner, this is a good one, and it's an old one. It's saved lots of folks from going hungry. Pray for each other and pray for the world. Check on your neighbors. Take care of each other. Show the world the love of God through these tough times. I want to thank y'all for joining us in the Hillbilly Kitchen. And if you haven't already, please don't forget to click like and subscribe before you leave. And until next time, remember to put God first.